Good evening, Moore, and welcome. Tonight we're going to be venturing into the depths of the woods because there are cabins here waiting for our arrival. I hope you're ready because it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. I grew up in Ohio in the 70s, and my childhood friend Joe and I spent all our time outside. Joe lived on a farm bordering a vast forest. My parents would drop me off in the morning, and we'd stay in the woods all weekend, only coming out for school. We loved pretending to be frontiersmen, building shelters, setting traps, and practicing fire making with sticks, the whole 9 yards. When we reached high school, we got the idea to emulate the movie Stand By Me, which had just come out. Instead of looking for a body, we decided to walk the railroad tracks out in the country, finding bridges to fish from and camping a little ways off the tracks. We knew it was dangerous and involved trespassing, but we were kids and full of adventure. We had a lot of fun discovering beautiful rivers, hidden bridges, and fishing spots. We hid from trains at night, camped in the woods near the tracks, and made small, hidden fires. Nothing bad ever happened. It was idyllic. We did it multiple times without any problems. After high school, Joe and I went our separate ways but stayed in touch, always trying to coordinate visits. One summer in the mid-90s, we both ended up in town for a week or two. During the day, we spent time with family, and at night, we either caught drinks at a bar or sat outside Joe's house around a fire, reminiscing about the old days. One night, nostalgia and beer got the better of us, and we decided to take a day to walk the rails, camp for a night, and walk back. My wife dropped us off at our old starting spot outside our hometown. She thought we were crazy and made sure to mention it as she drove away. Joe suggested we take the opposite direction this time, just to be adventurous. Knowing the land well and having a map, I agreed, and we set off. The day went fine. It was fun, and a little sad in a good way. We found a bridge, sat on the edge, smoked a joint, and moved on. Without fishing gear, we had brought canned food and other supplies. As night began to set in, we picked a spot to camp in a thick forested area with trees on every side of the train tracks, making it feel like a tunnel. Before setting up our hammocks, we decided to scout the perimeter, just like we used to make sure we weren't camping in someone's yard. We walked about 100 feet into the woods and up a small incline. From the top, we saw an old building down at the bottom, barely visible through the trees. Curious, we decided to check it out. As we got closer, we realized it wasn't a sugar shack as we had thought, but an old church. It was a squat, sagging building, its wooden planks almost black from years of moss and rot. A cross still stood atop it, also blackened. None of the windows had glass, and there were no doors, just open doorways. Inside, we could see rows of pews and a built-up section for a preacher to stand. We didn't go all the way in, we didn't want to. There was no sign of anyone else, no footprints, no paths, no roads, just an abandoned church. We left immediately and went back up the hill to our camp. Having a hill between us and the church made us feel better, but we were still uneasy. We chalked it up to the natural creepiness of finding a church in the middle of the woods. It was dusk, so we decided to set up our hammocks and go to sleep, planning to move out early the next morning. Night set in, and as we lay in our hammocks talking, we began to hear something from the direction of the church. Our conversation went something like this: "Do you hear that? What is that? It sounds like people singing." And it did sound like singing. We both slid out of our hammocks and hunkered down, straining to hear more. The singing continued, but it wasn't getting louder. Finally, we decided to creep back up the hill to see where the sound was coming from. We moved quietly through the woods, like it was second nature to us. The moon was barely out, providing just enough light to avoid walking into trees. We didn't use flashlights. At the top of the hill, we saw a light coming from the church and realized the singing was coming from inside. We put our heads close together and had a hushed conversation. Can you believe this? The light seemed to be candlelight, flickering, and though we tried, we couldn't make out the words being sung. It sounded like church music, but in another language. We watched for a while, trying to see who was inside, but only saw occasional shadows. We had no intention of getting closer. We kept a football field's length between us. The singing continued, then stopped. A booming male voice began to chant, sounding like an Old Testament preacher from a movie, but speaking a different language. It scared me thoroughly. The chant would be followed by a chorus of voices responding in unison, lasting a while before they all broke into a long, sustained wail that grew louder and more disturbing. I covered my ears, then it stopped. I was about to suggest we leave when Joe grabbed my shoulder and hissed, "They're coming out." We watched as a line of figures walked out of the church, holding hands in single file, each with a flashlight. They began to sing again and moved towards us. We booked it down to our campsite, grabbed our stuff, and ran to the tracks. We ran as fast as we could, stopping only to look back and see lights moving erratically down the hill, as if shaken by whoever held them. Eventually, we reached a road. Using our small map, we figured out our town was about 15 minutes away. We walked to a 24-hour gas station and called my wife to pick us up. Our friends thought it was just kids messing with us, but those voices didn't sound like kids to me. Whoever they were, it was the creepiest thing that ever happened to me in the woods. Some things in life you just wish you could forget, like that one cold night in England around my 20th birthday. It was September, and I was dealing with a lot, including a painful breakup. To avoid sulking in my room and smoking, I decided to get out for a while. I didn't want to go to my usual spot because it reminded me too much of my ex-girlfriend, so I chose to visit the lake my grandfather managed. It was about the same distance, but it felt strange heading in the opposite direction of what I was used to. Upon entering the lake through the toll gates my grandfather had given me a key to unlock, I realized I was completely alone. I had assumed there would be fishermen or swimmers, but there wasn't a soul in sight. It was a Sunday afternoon, and the lake was closed for business. With the key in hand and not wanting to go back home, I decided to explore the woods on my own. I started my journey through the trees, avoiding the lake as the sky darkened, casting a foreboding shadow over the water. The sight of the massive lake on the verge of freezing filled me with dread. It was foolish to start so late in the day, and losing track of time had made me forget how quickly it gets dark this time of year. After 15 minutes of walking, I decided to head back the way I came, or so I thought. Over 20 minutes later, I realized I was lost. The green gates I had entered through were nowhere in sight. Panic set in as I thought about spending the night lost and terrified in the woods. I ran, heart pounding, as the sky grew alarmingly dark. My family would start wondering why I wasn't home. Overwhelmed, I was forced to do the one thing I dreaded most: sit on a dead tree log in the middle of a dark, unfamiliar forest. I waited, composed myself, and decided my best chance was to find the path. Just then, I heard the unmistakable sound of twigs snapping behind me. Turning back, I saw the most horrific sight I've ever laid eyes on. Where I had been moments before, sat a man with rigid arms sticking out unnaturally to the sides. His entire body was caked in thick white powder, making it impossible to tell if he was clothed. His hair was indistinguishable from the chalky coating. Only his bulging eyes and gaping mouth were visible. We stayed motionless until the scene was shattered by the man letting out a horrendous hacking cough, exhaling plumes of white dust. Something inside me screamed to get out of there. I turned and ran as fast as my legs could carry me, away from that horrific coughing sound. I didn't look back, quickly finding the path and soon after, the gates. Despite their height, I climbed over them instead of unlocking the lock. When I got home, I explained what I had seen to my parents and eventually calmed down. My mother told me that the lake, like many others, was originally a quarry. Miners could have been crushed to death in cave-ins while mining chalk in the dangerous conditions. Even though that happened years ago, I have never been so scared in my life, and I will never go back there as long as I live. The scariest night of my life was a close encounter with a later confirmed murderer while camping with my boyfriend in the mountains. It ended with us running for our lives down the mountain in pitch darkness, clutching weapons and a hammer for self-protection. It was the end of 2018, our first getaway together as a couple. We went to the Appalachian Trail in Virginia, naively thinking it would be romantic to camp as far off the beaten path as possible. We walked deep into the wilderness and settled at a spot where no one had passed us all afternoon. We were making s'mores over the campfire just as twilight fell when my boyfriend, who has 20/20 vision, saw a man approaching us slowly. At first, we thought it was a park ranger coming to tell us to put out our campfire. I began to hide the weed, thinking that was our biggest concern. My boyfriend called out, "Hey, can I help you?" But the man didn't respond and continued walking toward us without a flashlight or any camping gear. It was odd and unnerving. Why was he out there so far at night without any equipment? He sped up after my boyfriend called out and had a strange, absent look in his eyes. When my boyfriend realized this wasn't a park ranger, he quickly put his hand in his pocket where he had a concealed weapon. Only then did the man acknowledge us, saying, "Oh, I was just wondering if y'all having a party." Remember, we were miles away from anyone, and it was getting dark. The man had no camping gear, just a tiny drawstring bag on his back. He didn't answer our questions about what he was doing there, only asking repeatedly how many people were with us. He began circling our site, trying to see how many people were there. My boyfriend didn't answer his questions, and the man continued to circle around us. We had set up camp on a steep hill, the only suitable spot for miles. The man told us he was going to set up camp nearby and walked off in a direction straight up the hill, which we knew was impossible due to the terrain. He had no light, no gear, and he was silent. We listened to his footsteps on the leaves as he walked up the hill, then stopped completely. He was still there, but we couldn't see him in the dark. I was freaking out, but I didn't want to seem cowardly in front of my boyfriend. We discussed whether we needed to leave, and my boyfriend handed me a utensil for protection. He said we needed to get out of there, grabbing only essential items. I was scared the man might have a firearm, but my boyfriend thought he might prefer to use a sharp object. We started running down the trail in the pitch darkness with our flashlights off, covering at least a mile. My boyfriend looked back at one point and saw the man staring at us. He ran behind me to protect me. The experience stuck with me, and I couldn't think of a rational or non-menacing reason for the man's presence that night. Last night, my now husband and I were reminiscing about that night and decided to Google if anything strange had happened in the same place around the same time. To our horror, we found that a few months after our incident, on the same trail, an unhinged man with crazy eyes had approached some hikers at twilight. He behaved aggressively before stabbing a man to death with a 17-inch weapon. The woman with him ran for her life, managing to escape after being attacked. The description matched the man who approached us, same age, deranged eyes, no flashlight. More articles revealed this psycho had been harassing hikers on the Appalachian Trail for a while. Several people had reported him. This erratic and violent man, well known to law enforcement along the trail, was James Sovereign Jordan. We got lucky, it could have been us. I grew up in rural New England, where, during high school, if my friends and I wanted to catch a movie, we had to drive about 45 minutes. One night, my buddy and I decided to see an action flick, something like Judge Dredd or Captain America. On the way back home, I opted for the back roads so I could drive a bit faster. The back roads in Vermont are both thrilling and unnerving if you're not familiar with them. They're often one-lane dirt paths winding through endless mountains and forests, with the occasional house every few miles. So, we're on one of these roads, rock and roll playing on the radio, and it's snowing, just a gentle, pleasant snowfall. We're deep in the woods, and we come to a hill. At the top, the road curves, creating a blind spot. Given the snow, I slowed down considerably. As we rounded the corner, my headlights illuminated a strange sight, a patch on the side of the road where the snow wasn't falling, almost as if it was suspended in midair. There was also a person standing there, and snow was accumulating on their shoulders and head. This scene stayed visible long enough for me to register what was happening, and then the snow buildup seemed to collapse, blending with the surroundings as if it had never been there. I continued driving in silence, trying to process what I had just seen and hoping for a rational explanation. I turned to my friend and asked if he saw it too. He said he thought he was hallucinating, but we both described the same thing. We decided to turn around and drive slowly up and down the road to see if we could spot it again or find any explanation, but there was nothing. Hey everyone, thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed tonight's spine-chilling camping tales. Your support means the world, and I can't wait to bring you more heart-pounding horror stories soon. Stay safe, stay curious, and until next time, keep the campfire burning. Like and share this video and don't forget to subscribe the channel.